well, can I first say, I mean, it's an honour and a pleasure not simply to be in conversation with Hanif, but to be doing so on the final night of the Literature Festival. And I'm sure it'll be something that I'll enjoy, and hopefully that you'll enjoy too. One thing I'd like to pick up in relation to Hanif is that for British Asians of a particular generation, my generation, Hanif's not simply a writer or a playwright or an essayist. When I started reading Hanif back in the 80s, when I was coming of age, what he articulated was my own struggle to find identity, to find a place on a cultural map of an often hostile world. And I think that's quite a good place to start, because it's quite interesting that, Hanif, when you, in your Penn Pinter lecture last year, with your acceptance speech, you made the point, in a sense, that you wrote for exactly those same reasons, that you wrote in order to find an identity, to situate yourself in an alien world. So it's one of those strange things that you write for the same reasons, if you like, that we read you.
Well, I'm glad to have been useful, Kenan, that all that scribbling has meant something to somebody. Because I guess when I was a kid like you, I was looking for writers too. And I was, when I was a kid in the suburbs, this was the 60s, and it was rough down there, and the racism was very overt. You looked for books to express your experience. And I have to say I couldn't find much. I read mostly American books, Baldwin and particularly, who I worship, Richard Bright and so on. But there wasn't much about what was happening to me. And there wasn't anything about my father's experience of a man coming from India to Britain, marrying a white woman, and surprise, surprise, his kids turned out to be people he couldn't understand at all, and he didn't understand why we were English. It seemed rather odd to him that though we were born in Britain and lived in Britain, that we were British kids, and it puzzled him. And trying to write about this, I guess, was important to me. I had to try and work out what the hell was going on, really. And it seemed to me important that I told other people what was going on. But there weren't other books like this, so I wondered whether it was all right to have all this in a book. So you, in a way, when you write a book, you have to invent what a book might be like and what might be in it. And it really worried me whether you could have whether kids wearing velvet trousers and being Pakistani in the same book. And after a while, you just have to be brave and try and put all these bits together. And I guess that might be what it might be to write a book, is to put things together in a way that they haven't been put together before, I guess. But as I say, I'm really glad to have been useful to people. It surprises me. But it made me aware that there was an audience.
Yeah, so it was, in a sense, it's more than being useful, isn't it? In a sense, it's a kind of, you and your readers were engaged in the same project.
Yeah, but I didn't know there was anybody out there. I mean, you write in a room in the suburbs, and you sort of send these letters out, and you write books, and years later someone says, well, that meant something to me. Well, at the time, you don't know that. So being useful to me is a good way of putting it. Sorry.
And how, over those 30 years since the Buddha of Suburbia and My Beautiful Laundrette, clearly the motivations, what drives you to write, must have changed over that time. So, if you were to write now, because I remember reading your introduction to My Beautiful Laundrette and a sense of what drove you to write that. But what has changed in what motivates you, what drives you to write?
I mean, I wrote them because I really wanted to find out what I had to say, and to place all the things that were happening to me, the 60s, racism, Enoch Powell, my dad, Britain, all of that in context. Now I still write, and I like to write. In fact, I like it more and more. Why do I do it? I do it because I really like to do it. When I get up in the morning, I really want to write a book, and my mum said to me the other day at lunch, she said, "What are you doing this afternoon? Why don't you have a lie down?" she said. And I said, well, no, I really want to write. And she said, well, I guess that's what it is, isn't it? That you really want to do this really badly, and it doesn't wear off. You still want to do it. I don't know why, but there is something about this book that I'm writing that is a real problem for me that I need to sort out, that I want to get right. And once I've done that one, if I'm lucky, there'll be another one. It's just a passion.
What about your relationship to Britain? Because I remember you wrote somewhere that, that you'd rather run down the street naked than stand up for the national anthem. Now, as a Republican, I can understand that sentiment, but there's obviously more to it than that. There was a kind of deep disenchantment with Britain as a nation. Do you still feel that sense of disenchantment?
Oh, I got the CBE now, mate. I'm in with the Queen. And it says on the medal, it's a fantastic medal, it says on the medal, "For God and Empire." Can't say fairer than that, can you? They give you a medal, and the two things that don't exist, you're celebrating. So it's beautifully meaningless. But when I was a kid, I hated Britain because Britain didn't want me. It didn't want people like me, and it didn't want people like my dad and other Indians and so on. And I realized after a bit that one of us had to change. And we couldn't do any more. Britain had to change. It had to become a place in which it was recognized there were people of different colors, different races, and that we were equal. And it was a big deal to do that. I don't think anybody else had ever done that before, not in Europe. It was a huge transformation of a country that was white, homogenous, one race, monocultural place, to become a multicultural country. And it's been a huge journey and a really big deal. It's never been done before, and it's been done on the whole pretty successfully. And it was done in the 80s, and I began to see that that was the only way it could all work, that we could all, as it were, live in the same place at the same time without killing each other out of hatred. And that is one of the things I wanted to track and write about.
And yet, one of the threads in your writing is not simply the celebration of diversity, of a new kind of Britain, of changing the cultural map of Britain, but also the problems of identity, the way that you become, identity becomes a prison, that identity begins as something that you want to hold on to because you want to say you're different and that Britain is a different place than it used to be, but it also becomes a prison, something that imprisons you within a sense of being Asian or being black or being Hindu or Muslim or whatever.
These labels are very constraining. They're useful at certain times, that somebody would stand up and say, I'm a feminist, or I'm gay, or I'm a however you want to describe yourself, and that would be a big deal for someone to say that about themselves in terms of the people that were around them. And then it becomes a prison. It's too little, it's not enough. I mean, one of the things that the novel does, that the novel celebrates, is huge complexity. That there is more to us than this, that, and the other, that we are very, very complicated beings. And it seems to me that the novel, particularly the novel, is the one place where that sense of complexity can really be understood and expressed. Nobody goes around thinking of themselves as being Asian or being Indian. You just don't think of it like that. There are certain times when you think, I'm the only Indian here, and then it matters, it's important, but most of the time you write from inside yourself. And it's complexity that I think that I'm interested in.
What about your relation to Pakistan? That, in a sense, you've had an even more ambivalent relation to Pakistan than you have your relation to Britain. I mean, how do you see that? How has that changed over time?
Well, my family moved from India in the 50s to start this new country, and they were very excited about it. They thought it was a fantastic opportunity to as it were, run your own shop, to have a brand new country. I remember my Uncle Omar, who was very excited about the idea of this new place. And pretty soon he became horrified and disillusioned by the whole thing. And there was a real problem with it, which was to do with whether it was to be a democratic state in which Muslims would live with other people, or whether it was to be a state that was based on some form of Islamic ideology. And I think it really bothered my family that nobody could ever quite make up their mind about that. But it isn't a place. Whenever I think of going to Pakistan, my heart always rather sinks, I'm afraid. I mean, what I'm interested in is really immigration, is what it means to leave a place, go to another place and make another life, particularly when you're surrounded by people who don't want you there, and this huge social experiment, as I said earlier. I think it's that rather than as it were, the homeland that interests me.
Do you see the future of Pakistan with any sense of optimism?
Well, my family who are there are rather nervous about what's going on all the time. They say there are more and more beards around them. They can, as it were, tell the state of the country by the number of beards they see on the streets, and it's getting very, very beardy in Karachi, they said recently. So things are not looking good over there. No.